Temperament is very important because of rooms that you walk in, right? In a nation where commerce and capital is very important,
Right.
you want to make sure that your temperament allows you into certain rooms.
Welcome back to TRU-Man podcast with Ray Black and Kevin Waring.
Ray Black is disappointed right now, guys.
This is the channel where we reflect on the work and the worth of a man, and we focus on gold paradigms and diamond principles. What did we do? We had an experience. Talk about passion. We captured a segment with lots of passion and insight and reference. Redemptive segment. But as it would have it with these new podcasters, man, we lost the segment. So we're here. We're going to showcase again and talk about the next P in the 8 P's of male masculinity, which is presence. You ready to go over this again, man?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
I'm amped now.
We were up there. We were talking about purpose. We talked about passion, and we start to see how the two merge together, how the two really feed off each other. And we want to move into this third P of male masculinity called presence. Now we're gonna let Kev jump it off because I do believe that presence is a topic Kevin is uniquely qualified to speak on. His experience gives him a position of giving us, some insights that are going to be useful and helpful. So I'm going to turn it over to Kev and let him kick us off with the element of presence.
Once again,
what say you, Kev?
That was cute. In the last video that we lost, I said that he was lying, so I'm gonna just bring that back. I think he's just trying to butter me up, but now let's hop right into it. Man, as a male, I think presence is everything. Like I said in the last video, I'm probably gonna say that a lot because we lost a lot of content, but it's all right.
It's all good. It's all good.
Like I said in the last video, one thing that I learned,
we didn't lose it. We lost the recording, but it's intrinsic to who we are, so we could bring it back out again.
All right now. But growing up, I realized that when I stepped in a room, I had a certain presence about me, even though I wasn't purposely giving it off. And I think I had got that from my father, and it was, don't mess with me. But it was also a presence of power, like assuredness. Mm-hmm. But from what I got from it, it was like, don't mess with me. Like, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. So a lot of the rooms that I was in at the time, it was like real, it was like thick, gritty. Man. It was like thick. So if you stepping in those rooms and
that's what we dealing with,
and you don't have the right presence in those rooms, probably wasn't going to go well for you.
Right.
So I attribute that presence that I didn't know that I had, that I don't know how I got, but I attribute that presence to me surviving. Right. So presence is everything. You have it laid out very well though. So Ray Black has presence laid out in 3 sections, which is temperament, articulation, and presentation. So we'll start with temperament. I think temperament, especially for a Black male in America, is super important. It's super important that as a Black male in America, you're well poised, right? You want to make sure that at all times, I don't want to say cool and collective, but you want to make sure that you're well put together and that you're collected as a person. You don't want to be outrageous. You don't want to be irate. You don't want to be too unpredictable in the wrong way, right? Temperament is very important because of rooms that you walk in, right? In a nation where commerce and capital is very important,
right,
you want to make sure that your temperament allows you into certain rooms, right? Because if you don't have the right temperament, then even if you're able to get in a room, you might not be in the conversation. Right? So temperament is very, very, very important. And going back to the video that we lost, a person makes their decision on how they are going to treat you and how they look at you within the first few seconds that they see you, right? So when you talk about presence and temperament, you want to think about, how is this person going to see me? How does this person see me within the first few seconds that they see me? How do you want to be seen, and how do people see you? Right? So temperament is super important, especially for African Americans.
Yeah. We look through, everybody looks through their prism. There's been an exercise that I find myself doing lately, ironically. And I guess this might go to temperament in a way. This goes to understanding also. The exercise I've been doing, I've been trying to understand people who are not like me by imagining living in a world through their eyes. So we talk about being black men, and obviously, we're two black gentlemen here on this podcast presenting to you today, right? And so we look through the prism of our experience. We know what Kevin said is exactly right. How we show up is how people treat us. We talked about purpose and passion, and now we're talking about the third P of presence, and how we show up. That first part of presence, the T, temperament, how we show up is how people will respond to us. And I said, I had to be aware that when we show up, we already have a frame of reference that we are working from. We already standing on a certain stage, if you will, in terms of how we are perceived. When we show up, we're working to sometimes change the course of how we are looked at. Like how we show up, it gives people, it helps bring people down depending on what our temperament is. I mean, I think you spoke about this in your last video, that, you realize that sometimes it's our job, or you may not have said it in this way, but we work to make people feel at ease. I think you said, right? We work, and sometimes that's our temperament. And, depending on how we show up, depending on how we command those elements of our presence, gives us command over how people deal with us. We have to acknowledge that we have the power to not allow people to throw us away, to kind of like, dismiss us. That's the word I'm looking for, right? Dependent on how we establish our presence. And part of that is temperament.
Yeah, for sure. What I was thinking about when you were speaking was, I know in our last video we spoke about, being in other rooms and making sure, or us feeling like we have to put people at ease with our temperament, but also it was a double-sided coin. We were actually, because I'm gonna keep saying this, I'm from Brooklyn, New York. So temperament goes a long way in the boardroom, but it also goes a long way in the hood, quote unquote, right? So I think that was something in our last video that we were speaking about. I was weighted heavy on how we should act in the boardroom, but just as important, you should know how to act in other situations as well, right? So you want to make sure that your temperament fits the environment that you're in, and it's very important to have both sides, right? So as a male, you have to know how to act when you're trying to get somebody to see what you're saying, but you also have to know how to act when you're around some people that you might want to hear what they're saying, or watch what they're doing.
It's very true,
right?
It's very true. How we walk, to your point, how I walk in the streets is sometimes how I walk different than how I walk in the business hallway
Right.
of the place where I might be employed. And being consciously aware that, I gotta put a little, a little dip in my step, or my feet might need to hit the pavement a little bit harder if I'm walking in a certain place. That's all a part of temperament. And I mean that's really springs forth from the well of self-awareness.
Right.
We cannot walk. I think that might be why some people get jacked, because
I mean, it depends. Like,
it depends. But I mean, if you walking
sometimes it's
around,
inevitable. You can't. It is
listen,
what it is.
listen. I think there's a way to kind of indicate, like, you might want to think twice, but we don't always want to walk in that either, because that is a double-edged sword, because then we
No,
are
we
perceived
don't want to
as
walk in that at all.
we're perceived as threatening. I'll be honest with you. I do, when we're in New York City, or New York City adjacent, and I will say I don't. I walk with a presence when I walk on the streets of New York City. I don't walk without a presence. I don't walk to get to allow people to question whether or not I'm an easy mark. Let me put it like that. And I'll be honest. And I think that's a part of it's almost like a defense tactic in a way.
It is.
But I think it's important that we be self-aware. Whether you agree with that, approach or not, and you can let me know,
Yeah.
how you think about that. But at the same time, I think capacity is important, and range is important. What is my range of expression? So you hear us here, and I think we can operate. We can say that we are able to operate in the boardroom, or out in public, on a beat, in the boardroom or on a beat, whichever, and that what do you call that when you're able to do that?
Well, you had used the word code switch.
Sometimes people might use the word code switch, right? But adapt to your environment, right? Adaptability. So these are elements of temperament.
Yeah. Just piggybacking off of what you're talking about, I think it's unfortunate when you have to, because it brings me back to the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s, where I feel like people, especially men in the hood,
you had that just your temperament in the 80s.
you had to be gangster.
You had that just your temperament in the 80s.
I'm talking about the time, bro. Like Jesus. I was born in the 80s. I don't care what.
Little 2-year-old thug.
I was actually a couple months, but it's all right. But I attribute that time, the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s, to like the gangster period, where you had to be a gangster in order to be outside in certain places. Like where I grew up, you had to be some sort of and I don't mean like gangster like shooting everybody, but I mean like you had to have some sort of street presence to you and how you moved in order to be outside, because if you didn't, you couldn't come outside, right?
How has that changed?
I don't know, because I'm not in the hood no more.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is that's unfortunate.
If you could, forecast or look into it, how you think? Do you think it has actually changed?
Well, I know
for young people today.
I know
for the young people listening today.
Yes, it has changed, because they have a choice now. Right? When I was growing up, there was no choice. There was no, oh, you could be smart and be cool. Like, that wasn't a cool thing to be like smart. It wasn't cool to be like, it wasn't cool to go and do your own thing. It wasn't cool to hop on a skateboard and go to Soho or go to Williamsburg. Like, that wasn't a cool thing. You feel me? So they have a choice. Like, it wasn't cool to be a part of like the math club or like go do something smart. That wasn't cool. Like, that was frowned upon almost.
It's probably not really. It might not really ever be cool.
Nah, it's cool. It's cool now. You could do whatever you want now.
I don't know. I think that the pressure is still there to fit a certain aesthetic. I think we're in our modern daytime, there is a certain, what do you call it? There is a certain image that is promoted, you know, and not fitting in the image today. I think it might be a little bit worse today,
Nah.
because not fitting. Let me say, that not fitting an image. For me, all right, today I think most people are more similar today than they are different. I think there's a way, a mode of being today, you know, and if you don't fit into that, then you're kind of like an oddball. Like there's very little individuality. When I see it, people dress the same. You know, you talk about when you were growing up, when I was growing up, I get it. You know, what it was to be someone who did not necessarily fit the mold of what the street was, but I was able to move in the way that I needed to, and people understood that's him. Where I grew up in. Now, it might not have been as hectic, but still, hood is the hood, the street is the street. I get it, right? We the what it was. Now, not that I didn't have to fight for to be able to express myself as I was. Not that I didn't take some losses from that, in a way, you know, drawback, or maybe I was kept out of a certain element because of that, and that's fine. But I think it's less of that element now. There's less sway with people being able to express themselves. Individuality seems to be dying to me today.
I totally disagree. What I'm trying to tell you is, when I was growing up, there was no you can be who you are. If you was not, well, where I grew up, if you was not street, you could not come outside. Period. You had to stay in the house. Period. Like, there was no coming outside. There was no he is who he is.
Do
No.
you think that was globally the reality, or do you
I
think
don't
that
know.
was?
I'm from Brooklyn, New York.
All right, let me finish the question, because Brooklyn might not have been our wholesale, you know, the whole
Possible.
society.
Possible.
Now,
it's not.
And Brooklyn wasn't absolutely unique. You know what I'm saying? Because I grew up on the uptown in the Bronx, and Harlem, and these elements were the same there. You had to understand where you were moving and how you were moving. But all I'm trying to contrast is, in general, today, I think that they worked hard, and society has developed to a point where now it's almost like one mold, you know, and the options are not promoted there a lot for young people now. You know, the options aren't there. So I see a lot of people following because they have limited options. The options seems to be constricting, you know, closing in a little bit on for what the young people have. I don't see a larger sway of options today.
Let me give you an example.
Well, what do you think about that?
Well,
Go ahead.
so, like I said, when I was growing up, he was a gangster, basketball player, football player. Well, he felt maybe not. We couldn't even be rappers like yet, so that wasn't that. Or you fell somewhere in between where you kind of got like trampled over because you didn't really matter type ish. So nowadays, respectfully, because of first of all, there's a whole movement of individuality, but now these kids, they can be like, you can be like the fashion guy.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? You can literally be the smart guy in the class and be accepted. And there's whole systems set up so that they can't be bullied. Like, there's whole systems set up, even though it's still happening, there's whole systems set up where you're not supposed to be verbally bullied due to social media. Like, you have to let that person be that person. and I'm trying to tread lightly, but I think I can only bring it up, and I have nothing but respect for the LGBTQ community. But because of that movement, kids now have endless opportunities to be what they want. Whereas when I was growing up, the only person that we knew that was LBGTQ had the best hands in the world, because they had to be more gangster than the most gangster person in order to be that person.
But
Yeah.
right. Listen, the opportunities, right? They've changed a bit. The world has changed a bit. Social norms have changed a bit, right? And the demands for getting ahead have changed a bit. But it might be a hard contrast to make, to say what was really the pressures, if they were different than now. I'm not sure if I can conclude one way or the other.
Yeah.
But I will say that, and we might agree that no matter what, temperament was as important then as it is now. At the end of the day, no matter how you really show up, right? No matter how or who you are, it's still going to be on a register of whether or not your temperament fits with what you're trying to accomplish.
Right.
But I do have to concede to something you said. There is a lot that's allowed. There's a lot more that's allowed today. There's a lot more grace for showing up,
and protection,
and protection for autonomy, unless now there might be an argument that only certain temperaments are tolerated. There might be an argument that not every single temperament is tolerated. So we're here talking about the 8 P's of male masculinity on TRU-Man podcast, and we can take now this kernel of an idea about our very topic, male masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a subject that we see that is tolerated more today than it was in the past? I would venture to say that there might be a question mark on that part right there. Now, we can't talk about, or I can't talk about, I don't think you can talk about female masculinity. We don't have that experience. I can't talk about female femininity. We don't have that experience. I really can't talk very much about male femininity, because although we are a balance of polarities, by and large, our masculinity, or my masculinity, rules over elements and characterizations of femininity. All right, so I can't really speak to that, but I can speak comfortably about male masculinity. And we're presenting here the 8 P's of male masculinity. And we're in the third P, which is presence, which has 3 elements. And we started off talking about temperament. So, when you go back about talking about the days, or what's allowed, or the grace given people to show up, mm-hmm. and how they have autonomy, I will say that maybe yes, but does the same hold true for male masculinity?
Well, I'm going to say this, and then I think we have to go to a break, but I think the problem with asking and answering that question is, I think what you're laying down here, this foundation, is a great foundation for what male masculinity is / what we think male masculinity is. And for me to answer your question, I would have to know what you feel society's definition of masculinity is. Because right now, if you're asking me that question based on this, right, based on what you've laid out or what we're about to lay out, then I would answer it one way. But if you ask me that according to what society says male masculinity is, then I'll have to answer it another way.
8 P's of Male Masculinity, TRU-Man podcast. We're going to take a break and we will come back and discuss a little bit more about presence. Third P of the 8 P's of Male Masculinity. See us in a minute.